A reading from the Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you.
When the Magi had departed, behold, the angel of God appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Rise, take the child and his mother, flee to Egypt, and stay there until I tell you. Herod is going to search for the child to destroy him." Joseph rose and took the child and his mother by night and departed from Egypt. He stayed there until the death of Herod, that what God had said through the prophet might be fulfilled. "Out of Egypt I called my son." When Herod had died, behold, the angel of God appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Rise, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead." He rose, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was ruling over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was more afraid to go back there. And because he had been warned in a dream, he departed for the region of Galilee. He went and dwelt in a town called Nazareth, so that what had been spoken through the prophets might be fulfilled: "He shall be called a Nazarene." This is the good news regarding our brother Jesus. Praise to you, Jesus Christ. Have a seat. My granddaughter Maggie turns 4 next week. Maggie is very much her own person, with a will and a temperament that will rule somewhere in life, I am sure. She will look her dad dead in the eyes, point her finger in his face and say, "You'd better watch yourself." He's about to redirect her behavior. We all know who calls the shots in that family. Well, for her birthday, I ordered some custom-made nesting dolls, like the little Russian dolls. And each doll has the face of a family member. We'll see, they're still coming in the mail. But it includes their 2 dogs, Grizzly and Daisy. I guess the idea that I wanted Maggie to capture, even through the turbulent days that are bound to come, wait until she's 15. It's the interconnectedness of her family. I know how desperately her parents longed to have her. Her sister was born through in vitro. They had years of infertility, and just when they gave up, just as her mother turned 40, surprise. So Maggie was a real blessing to them, and what her parents envisioned was a sense of cherished belonging for Maggie. What Maggie experiences can feel like one correction after another, but this is the reality of family life, isn't it? In our gospel reading, we see Joseph discerning a difficult choice for his family. Joseph and Mary didn't have privilege or connections. They were travelers without a place to call home. Like so many of our migrant neighbors, they longed for safety and for a place to provide for their basic needs. Rumors had it that returning home from Bethlehem wasn't safe. King Herod was on the prowl. He ordered an off-cycle census to tighten the control of his reign. A ruler threatened by losing power, ordering raids, tearing families apart, targeting children. As Brian Sauter of Faith and Place reminds us, this is the origin story of a God-sent child, born under authoritarian rule, shaped by displacement and forged in resistance. These are the politics of Christmas, and if we cannot see it and cannot see in the face of our families today, the Holy Family, then we must ask ourselves, why do we insist on turning away? And so Joseph and Mary considered their options and determined to travel 300 miles to Egypt. crossing borders in order to spare the life of their child. They assimilated there, as so many of our neighbors do, until they were able to return to their homeland. I wondered about the story from Jesus' childhood and how much he heard of it over the years as he grew up. Did they celebrate his birthday with the annual retelling of his birth? Did they their travels and his early years in a foreign land? Did he fully grasp the risks that they took, the sacrifices that they made on his behalf? How often, when we think back on our own lives, we think from the perspective of a child, whether or not we felt fed or cared for, whether we felt cherished or ignored, favored or treated like the family scapegoat, whether our families were dysfunctional or toxic, a reminder of the good old days, or just, how families are. How often do we stop to consider the human side of our parents? What it was like for them to come together, to create a family, to carry out their day-to-day responsibilities. How often do we recognize that there were days when they were exhausted, dealing with their own wounds, or surrendering their own unmet needs in order to show up and do the best that they could for their children, the best that they could. I've known a lot of parents over the years, including my own, and I've never met a parent who wished to fail, who didn't care that they messed up, that they were too angry or reactive or too busy or disengaged, and their children felt the brunt of it. That day of reckoning for every parent comes with regret and often a heavy layer of shame. But most parents I have known have done the best that they could with what they brought to the situation, whether it was enough or not. Who knows, perhaps Jesus said to Joseph, "Why couldn't I have lived in Nazareth after I was born? Why did you have to drag us all the way to Egypt, where we didn't even know the language? I didn't look like the other kids, and we were the poor family on the block. Why did you put us through that?" Without any regard for the fear that gripped Joseph that day. This month we lost two parents whose story is familiar to us. Rob Reiner and Michelle Singer Reiner were killed by their son, who suffered with drug addiction and psychiatric problems. If you have family members with mental health issues, you know how torn you can be. We love our children who suffer, and we desperately want them to receive the help that they need. But when to enact tough love and necessary boundaries, and when to risk the safety of everyone just to shelter and care for a child or a parent who, in that moment, cannot help themselves, is truly a painful predicament. There is no easy path, and woe to us who judge. For a decade in the 1970s, American families would tune into CBS and watch Rob Reiner in the weekly sitcom All in the Family, a show that captured the then changing social landscape through the conservative Bunker family. Last week we reminisced over a coffee and donuts how closely this television family represented our own. Archie Bunker, a working class, bigoted, outspoken dad, sitting in his favorite armchair, ordering his rather docile wife Edith around. Gloria, their adult daughter, and Michael, her live-in boyfriend, who did eventually marry. We almost hurt for Archie, who opened every show with the song "Those Were the Days." Full of nostalgia for simpler times, Archie struggled to wrap his head around social change with his narrow-minded and dismissive rants. We all knew Archie. He was our uncle, our grandfather, our dad. For me, the favorite recliner from which Archie pontificated, the evening newspaper, And the traditional gender roles that he and Edith played reminded me of my grandparents. My dad was like Michael, the bearded, long-haired activist, angry at the government, protesting for social change, arguing with his parents and in their faces about how stuck they were in a different era. All in the Family was my first exposure to what became coined as a generation gap, where there's a significant difference in beliefs, values, and outlooks between age groups, causing all sorts of conflict in social and political settings, huge cultural shifts with younger people leading the way and older generations seeming to fall behind. Perhaps it's the experience of a generation gap that prompts the writer of our first reading to encourage young people to honor their parents. We've talked a lot during Advent about how to bridge the gap with our political enemies and how to extend to others a sense of cherished belonging. And while we have focused on loving those who are politically different than us, conflict between generations is equally detrimental to the common good and equally divisive in our current culture. In an article by Pew Research, we learned that from immigration and race to foreign policy and the scope of government, millennials and Gen Xers stand significantly far apart from their two older cohorts, baby boomers and silents. Silents, I learned, are those born between 1928 and 1945. The label silence refers to their conformist and civic instincts, as they were children of the Great Depression and World War II. Young voters from the millennial generation, Gen Z, are emerging as the demographic center of power in American politics. But new studies by UC Berkeley researchers find they are fatalistic and about critical problems such as economic inequality, climate change, and the future of democracy. And the sense of fatalism extends across the right, the center, and the left. From their perspective, fractured, dysfunctional government systems created and maintained by the previous generations are simply incapable of addressing the critical challenges that fall heavily on their generations. Someone take the car keys away from grandpa, right? We're taking over, is the message at political rallies across the country. And, there may be something to what they contend. Are we ready and capable of passing the torch? It has to happen eventually. Bridging this generational gap in our families and in our culture means we have to return to valuing one another. Remembering that systems change when people change, right? And people change when they are cherished. But as stated in a Huffington Post article, a rising trend of family estrangement has been identified, with 7% of all adults estranged from their mothers and 27% from their fathers. Psychologist Dr. Joshua Coleman states the days of honor thy mother and thy father, of respect your elders, have given way. He blames the shift partially on social media and content about toxic families, which he says encourages inflammatory reactions to parents' behaviors. He also says that therapists are partially to blame for pathologizing parents with language like narcissist, gaslighting, boundary crosser. But throughout the podcast, he uses similar words to describe the children who decide to cut off their parents, calling them conflict avoidant, depressive, and overreactive. This all feels, maybe a little self-serving to remind the younger generation to appreciate us older folks a little more, as most of us are of that generation being maligned these days. And it would be easy to feel justified by our readings and saying, yeah, back to the days when we honored our mothers and fathers, back to when we respected our elders. But relationships are reciprocal, are they not? Our incarnate God, existing not three, not one, calls us into communion with one another, into community, multi-generational communities. Families, all families, no matter how they are constructed, no matter how functional or stressed, how loving or challenged, are designed to be sacred microcosms of the love that exists in the Holy Trinity. And so let's challenge ourselves, boomers, to be perhaps a little more gracious in passing on the baton to the younger generation, to acknowledging that they might know a thing or two. And when they lack the wisdom that comes with age, let's give them the grace to figure it out like we had to do when we were young. Full of confidence, maybe a little cynical about our parents who were to us stuck in the dark ages. For in the end, we need them as much as they need us. The future is really in their hands. Our future is in their hands. Dan Jury was 23 years old when he made the radical decision to move his 81-year-old grandfather, Frank, out of a dilapidated nursing home into his own modest apartment to provide full-time care. For 3 years, while all his friends were developing their careers and dating, Dan learned how to bathe Frank, to organize his medications, to sit with his grandfather during frightening moments of confusion. While other family members said that Dan was wasting his youth, Dan said those years for caring for Grant taught him more about living fully than any job or relationship ever could, calling it the most important work of his life. And Frank, a Ukrainian Jewish immigrant who'd arrived at Ellis Island in 1906 and built a life through Depression-era hardships, spent his final years not as a burden, but as Dan's teacher, sharing stories of the old country, demonstrating quiet courage during painful medical treatments, and modeling the grace of accepting help without losing dignity. My son, my daughter, take care of your parents when they are old. Even if their minds fail, be considerate of them. In times of trouble, it will be recalled to your advantage. Like warmth upon frost, it will melt away your sins. For the kindness people have done crosses their paths later on. That should you one day stumble, you too will find the support that you need. May it be so. Amen.
Amen.